You have to make $140 million plus the $5 million production budget, which means it's a $145 million break even on a $5 million movie.
Can you explain why a movie does not make business sense?
It's such an interesting question and an interesting model when you talk about the movie industry and the film industry. And it's the reason it's interesting is because Hollywood's always existed in this bubble because it was always so difficult to be able to create entertainment, and the technology wasn't democratized, so not a lot of people could make entertainment. And so whenever entertainment was made, especially film, whenever a film was made, it was a very special, rare thing, and a lot of that defied the rules of economics in the rest of the world. Now it seems that in a commoditized market, and there's so much content, that when you look at just the business of filmmaking, it doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people. And if you go out and talk to a lot of investors, and the investors a lot of times will tell you, most times they'll tell you that the economics of the industry just doesn't make sense for them, where you put a lot of money in, especially say like a independent film venture. You put a lot of money in up front. You don't see any return for a long time. There's no sort of incubation model that you see out of Silicon Valley or even just a startup business. It's a big, crazy roll of the dice. You put a lot of money in, and you just hope and pray that a bunch of people show up on the same weekend, and if they show up on the first 2 weekends at least, maybe you get your money back. But if they don't, then you lose it all. And it's just a high risk. It's a high risk venture, especially in a commoditized market where there's this hyper competition. And so it's if you look at even other aspects. I mean, you think of other aspects of the way normal business is done. Typically, the cost of production will drive the retail cost of a product, for example. And so if you can make a Toyota for $10,000, then you can, of hard cost manufacturing, you could sell it for, I don't know, $22,000, and there you have a margin in there to make your money. But if it costs $90,000 to make a Maserati, then you have to sell it for $200,000 in order to have your margin. You can't sell it for $20,000 or else you're going to lose money. And that just makes sense, right? Of course, that's the way the world works. But when in filmmaking, I could make a $5,000 Paranormal Activity, and you could make a $300 million Avengers movie, and someone still pays the same $12 at the movie theater for the product, and that makes sense to us in the Hollywood bubble, but for the rest of the world, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And so now you're starting to see a lot of conversation around the variable pricing, and maybe blockbusters should be $50 movie tickets, and Paranormal Activity or indie films should be $2 tickets, and maybe we should scale ticket prices to the cost of production, trying to pull it more in line with the way normal business works. And so it's really, when it just comes down to it, especially if you don't have any pre-awareness of the market, the venture to most people is just very, very risky. Especially when you add in the cost of P&A and how much you have to saturate the market with marketing just to get people there. It takes the break even in a really crazy way. I think Steven Soderbergh said a couple years ago that he predicted the death of the independent film market within 5 to 10 years because the cost of P&A was going through the roof at this tremendous rate. So he said, when 15 years ago, you would spend $3 million to make an independent film, and then you would put an equal amount in for P&A with the distributor would. You put an equal amount in for the P&A, and then ultimately you work out your break even from that, right? So so usually if you put $3 million production, $3 million P&A, what happens is you have to recoup 50 cents on the dollar for the P&A. And so you actually have to make $6 million to make back the $3 million of the P&A because you split it, the distributor splits it with the exhibitors, right? So that's how it would work out. But now Steven Soderbergh says, especially with independent films, everything's so competitive and they're so oversaturated and the market is so commoditized that he says, if you want to be a blip on the radar, you have to spend at least $35 million of domestic P&A, $35 million of international P&A, just so people know that you're out there, because there's so much stuff hitting the market all the time. So let's take a $5 million movie, for example. If you make a movie for $5 million and then you spend $35 million domestic P&A, $35 million of international P&A, that's $70 million of P&A, which means you have to make $140 million to pay back, to recoup that, right? Because you have to split every dollar with the exhibitor and you recoup 50 cents on the dollar. So you have to make $140 million plus the $5 million production budget, which means it's a $145 million break even on a $5 million movie. Why does that matter? This is why it matters. Independent filmmakers require and rely on going to investors and saying, will you give me your money so that I can make my movie? And so just imagine the conversation of going to an investor and saying, I need you to give me $5 million of your money so I can make my movie. And all we need to do is make $145 million at the box office, and you get all your money. You get all your money back. Does that make sense at all? It really doesn't. It doesn't to most people. Now, some people have they have an appetite for risk, and they, and they want their granddaughter to be able to star in a movie, and so they don't care to fund it, and they do it for other reasons, vanity projects, things like that. But more and more investors now today are like, that just doesn't make sense. That's why studios love to do $100 million movies. This is where we've seen the death of the $20 million film, I think, is because think about a $100 million movie, put a $100 million production budget with $100 million domestic P&A, $100 million of international P&A. That's $200 million of P&A. You recoup that 50 cents on the dollar, which means you have to make $400 million back, plus the $100 million production budget. That's a $500 million break even on a $100 million movie. So how many $100 million movies make $500 million as opposed to a $20 million movie making $250 million, right? Now all of a sudden the $100 million movie makes maybe more economic sense than the $20 million movie because the P&A is thrown all out of whack, right? So as filmmakers, we look at films through the lens of the art and the films of through the lens of the story and what we want to achieve and what we want to say culturally, but we fail to put ourselves in the seat of the investor. And this is something that I've learned. I'm not a naturally inclined business person. Some people are super entrepreneurial and they get their MBA and things like that. But I'm not a natural business person. But the more I was talking with investors, the more they would and the more they would tell me no. I would say, why doesn't it make sense to you? And they would explain why this doesn't make sense. And when I look at it from the investor's point of view, then I'm like, wow, yeah, that is kind of crazy. And that's why we're seeing independent film investment dry up more and more, because just the economics of the business model just doesn't compute with the people that have to fund the whole thing. And so you have to understand that they're coming from it. Usually, by and large, investors, independent film investors, aren't filmmakers. They're business people, right? They've made their money in other sectors, right? So they're looking at everything through a completely different frame than the filmmaker, by and large. And I think the more filmmakers can get in tune with the economics surrounding a film and figure out how to reorient the economics of the venture to match the economics of a consumer brand venture or a regular, or like a Silicon Valley startup, figure out how do we start to have the film venture look like one of those other things. And I think if we do that, then we're going to see maybe an uptick in the amount of investment that now goes into independent films, which would be great for everybody, right? But it's just going to take a paradigm shift. Movies aren't as special as they used to be because there's so many of them. And so we can't just rely on movies being as magical in the eyes of investors before. We can't dazzle them with a movie, I don't think, as much. Now we have to make sense to them, and we have to be empathetic to the seat that they sit in.
Is the film industry the only industry where, to graph out what you talked about and really go down line by line, it doesn't make business sense? Or are there other industries where that's very similar?
Well, I think when you look at what you typically look for is the difference between a commoditized business and a non-commoditized business. And these are big $10 words, but the difference is, commoditization is where it is a term where you're in a market where you're no longer unique. And because there's so much competition, there's hyper competition and oversaturation that has flooded the market. Most businesses operate in commoditized markets, but businesses that operate outside of commoditized markets, by and large, can set their own rules, and they can defy those odds because what they're doing is so special and so unique. They kind of get a pass because they're creating something that hardly anybody else is creating, until other people start duplicating that and they become commoditized as well. And there was a time when the smartphone was not commoditized. And so all of a sudden, Apple and Steve Jobs, they could sort of set the rules of the game, of the economics of the smartphone. And it was up to them, not the market forces. But now I think smartphones have become commoditized in such a way that it's a different market than it was 10, 15 years ago, or 12 years ago, however long smartphones have been out, right? So I think when you're looking for the businesses that operate outside of a normal paradigm, you're looking for the businesses that are just super unique, that don't have a lot of competition. And when you don't have a lot of competition, I'm from Kentucky, and they call that being in the catbird seat. You're in an advantageous situation, and entertainment used to be that. And filmmaking used to be that because it was always too hard, too expensive, too difficult to be able to make a movie. We didn't have access to the camera technology and to the post-production technology. We didn't have access, we had to shoot on film, and film's super expensive. We didn't have the digital technology, and we definitely didn't have distribution. I mean, the biggest shift, I think, for filmmakers, since the invention of the talkie is the internet being a distribution mechanism. And because now the ability to create and the ability to distribute has been democratized to the filmmaker. But always before, people didn't have the technology to create, and even if you figured out how to create, you didn't know what to do with it because you couldn't distribute. And so that was tough. And so the only people that could create movies were 5 or 6 companies in the entire world that had the technology and had the infrastructure for distribution that could do that. So anytime a movie would hit, it would be super special. And it would be an event, and it would be because we just didn't have a lot of them coming out. I mean, think about. I remember when I was a kid, E.T. was in the movie theater for over a year, I believe. It was around a year, right? Just in the theater, the theatrical run. Now, Star Wars was in there, I think, 44 weeks, the original Star Wars movie. You look at something like even Back to the Future had like a 35-week run in movie theaters. Now you look at Avengers Endgame, which before the re-release of Avatar was objectively the most successful film of all time, Avengers Endgame. That was in movie theaters for 3 months? And then it was pushed out. There's too much stuff being pushed into the system, right? There's too much stuff in the pipeline. I mean, you talk to showrunners, they say 15 years ago, there were 7 places that you could sell a 1-hour drama. Now there's 75 places you can sell a 1-hour drama, right? Everybody's making stuff because the technology's become democratized. And so the entertainment industry has shifted from a non-commoditized, very special, magical, like dazzling, glittery thing into the same bucket as smartphones and potato chips and coffee shops and everything else that is commoditized, which is now forcing filmmakers and executives and studios and everybody that makes this stuff. Now we have to relearn and what are the rules of the game? What are the economics of the game? How do we shift this to better compete in a commoditized market? It's I'm completely convinced that the shift into a commoditized market is, I think, for fans, it's the best thing that's ever happened, because we got as much content as we got more content than we could ever consume. More movies we could ever watch, more TV shows that we could ever watch, more books we could ever read, more games we could ever play, more songs we could ever listen to. We can't watch everything on YouTube. We can't, there's more TikTok videos than any one person could ever consume ever, which is great for fans. But the commoditized market, I think, is the single biggest obstacle facing filmmakers today. The obstacle of access and creation has been solved, right? Because we got cameras. We have if you've seen the new iPhone, the iPhone 13 that they announced, like the camera technology in that is absolutely amazing, right? And even the iPhone 12, absolutely amazing what you can do with the camera technology with that, right? But even then, beyond just the phones, I mean, you can go get a Red camera, a Red Epic for a few $1,000s, and you can rent a lens, for several $100s over the weekend, and you're able to do that. You didn't used to be able to do that. Now you can. And so that has been solved. Access and creation has been solved, I think, for filmmakers. Distribution has been solved for filmmakers. We know now how to get our stuff to audiences. We know how to get it in front of people. We know how to build community. We go direct to consumer in about 35 different platforms, right? In addition to the other traditional platforms of selling to the studios. But even if you want to go direct to consumer, we have the ability to do that. The fact that I can shoot a video right now and hit a few buttons and upload it to YouTube, and instantly it's in 6 billion people's pockets is insane and crazy and awesome and exciting. So access has been solved, distribution has been solved, but now we've traded those problems in for a new problem, which is, how do we survive in a commoditized market? How do we outpunch 3 million other things that are all competing against each other? Somebody said to me recently, they said, making a movie today is like being a needle in a haystack, because you just release it and there's so much other stuff. I don't actually think it's being a needle in a haystack. I think releasing a movie in today's market is like being a needle in a needle stack. If you're in a needle in a haystack, at least you're unique. But now, when you release your horror movie into the market, that's awesome. That's such an amazing achievement, right? But 1,000 other people are releasing their horror movie at the same time, and you're no longer unique. And now you have all this crazy competition, and now you have to figure out how to outpunch your way, outpunch your way from the glut of horror movies, but also all the other movies and all the other television shows and all the other books. And then don't even get me started about the TikTok videos and Fortnite and things like that pull everybody's competition, or it pulls everybody's eyeballs, right? And which could create this hyper competition between all platforms, right? So it's that obstacle of a commoditized market that I think needs to be the focus of filmmakers as we go out of 2021 into 2022 and beyond. We need to figure out, again, obviously you need to make a good movie and you need to tell a great story. You need to have rich characters, all the craft stuff still applies. I'm not talking about that. But now we have to shift the paradigm of our minds and say, what kind of model and business model and IP model can I launch that is not going to survive 1997 Paramount Pictures Hollywood, because 1997 was great, but it was a long time ago, and we don't live in that market anymore. Today's market is a commoditized market, and I need my plan and my model and my approach to survive that. And that's a completely different conversation.